For some Cubans, the economic crisis that started in the 90s has now ended. American blockade, low productivity, the structure of the economy could be some of the reason. It was known that the Cuban GDP grew only 0.6% in the first semester of this year. This could lead to a question: is Cuba living a new crisis? To find some answers, we met with the young professor Ricardo Torres, who has a PhD in economics. So the Center for the Study of the Cuban Economy, as you imagine, a lot of people come here, Professor, to find answers about the Cuban economy.
A lot of people come and we try to compensate them with our research. And that's right, yeah, this is the Center for the Study of the Cuban Economy. So we've been here for 25 years. We're celebrating that through organizing workshops, conferences, publishing books, articles, all that can be expected from professors and researchers from the University of Havana. And we basically work in two teams. So one, I spend most of the time doing research on global issues about the Cuban economy. I mean monetary policy, fiscal policy, economic international relations, all that. And the other team works more with firms. They make consultancies, they do research on management and all that. So yeah, that's basically what we do.
It's interesting, but it's always controversial. I believe.
It's highly controversial. As you can imagine, when anyone talks about the economy, it's also talking about politics. And it's basically talking about people's lives. So that's why it's highly controversial. Not everybody agrees on everything in any point in time when it comes to the economy.
But it's science, in the end.
It's science. And
you may like it or not, but it's
more
science.
People from the media understands that better in the future. It's also science, yeah, that's right. So please have a seat.
So, doctor, there is a question which I've been seeing that it's been very debated on the web here in Cuba, that has to do with a figure that recently was announced by the Cuban government, that the Cuban GDP of the first semester of this year was low, 0.6% of growth. Why do you think this figure is that low?
Well, Cristina, if you actually look at Cuba's economic performance over the last 30 years, starting the second half of the 80s, we'll see very clearly that our economic growth has been very low for a long time. And I think that we can mention at least three important reasons for that. One would be what I consider one of the main contradictions of Cuba's economic development over the last 55 years, which is we've been very efficient at creating human capital. So a largely successful country with a very efficient education and health systems. So we've been, again, very efficient at converting few resources into a growing pool of a fairly educated labor force, especially by developing country centers. But on the other hand, we've done very poor at using that talent, that knowledge, that capital to produce welfare, to produce goods and services for the overall economy. The second one has to do with Cuba's standing in the international economy. So for a variety of reasons, some of them related to our own economic policies, some others related to US sanctions, for instance, we remain pretty isolated, economically speaking, from the rest of the world. So let's only take a look at the network of preferential trade agreements that exist today in the world. An increasingly connected, financially speaking, world. Cuba is basically out of that. So we only have few, I would say, partial trade agreements with some countries in Latin America. By the way, some that we are not using fully because we don't have much to export to those countries. And that's all we have in terms of trade agreements with the world. So it means that in a context of an increasing number of such agreements between all countries, Cuba has remained basically out of the equation. And that puts like a lot of costs, I would say, for our exporters, for our chances to penetrate other markets, foreign markets. So that's another reason. And definitely, if we look at our financial situation, again, for different reasons, Cuba is not a member of any major financial institution in this world. I'm talking about the IMF, the World Bank, but also some regional bodies like the Inter-American Development Bank or even the South Bank or Bank of the South that has been recently created. So it's hard for the Cuban economy to get access to foreign savings that in any case are critical for any small developing country like Cuba is. And the third reason for that poor economic performance is related to the way we've been approaching the design of our domestic economic policies. I mean, during 30 years, we built an economic model, highly centralized economy based on central planning, where most of the economic activities stay hands through certain companies. Well, there are reasons for that, but what we know is that it doesn't work well for a variety of reasons. And although there's been changes in the way our economy functions over the last 25 years, the truth is that there hasn't been enough. And well, we are paying the cost of that. Another point, I think one that sums up what I just said about reasons for that performance has to do with, we've lacked over the last 25 years a clear economic strategy, a clear development strategy. So we've been managing crisis after crisis. So with a very short-term focus to the economy. And that's very costly for a developing country. So
this update of the economy that was approved recently in the last Congress of the Communist Party could be called like a new model?
When you look at the guidelines, the lineamientos, I think it's very important that we adopted that in 2011 because I think it's for me it's more like a founding body that could take us to adopting a brand new economic model or at least the general contours of that model and following that a development strategy. So yeah, it's very important and it's the very beginning, I would say, of what we actually need, which is new rules, I would say, in many areas of our economic and social model, by the way, and a development strategy.
There are people that relate the 0.6% of the GDP and this update, the guidelines, like that's a result of this that has not been applied well. It has to do one thing with the other?
I think, again, looking at the guidelines, you can see, like two, let's say, groups of actions. One would be a set of steps aimed at changing gradually the fundamentals of the Cuban economy, which have to do with the so-called structural factors that are affecting our performance currently. And some other steps are more short-term oriented to tackle some problems that are more like, some very pressing issues that affect, of course, also Cuba right now. Yes, if you look, I would say, for the first group, the structural factors, since they are structural, it takes time to modify those conditions. So it would be unfair to say, okay, we failed because after 3 years, we are only growing 0.6% in a semester. But it's also true that, again, being a good starting point, in the opinion of many specialists, we think that we can do more, both in terms of the sequence of the transformations that have been introduced and the pace, the speed at which they've been put into practice. And the answer, finally, to your question would be a half yes. Basically, yes, there are some things that if we had done it differently over the last 3 years, probably we would have had a different performance right now. But let's also bear in mind that the world economy is not going through a golden period. So that also affects Cuba. That's undeniable. And again, at the end, it's like a combination, right, of
there's a
different
perception, Professor, in the Cuban community, the Cuban people, that like they're expecting more from this new model or this starting point that you call like a foundation, because they expect like a relief, economically speaking, because of the long crisis that we've been having since the 90s. And there's a perception that it's not working fast enough. Why it has been taking so much time to see some result in the population?
So yeah, there are many aspects around that. One would be, since again our economy has been performing very poorly over the last at least 30 years, so we've been accumulating problems and accumulating distortions in our economy over that period. So it means that we cannot change that in 3 years.
The double currency has to do with that.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the examples. There are many others out there. But basically the rationale is, okay, it took us 30 years to create these distortions. It won't, 3 years won't be enough to address all of them successfully at the same time. So that's the first point. Then we also have to take into account, and this is an argument that is usually forgotten, which is during the first 30 years of Cuba's revolution, Cuba gradually became a more egalitarian society, meaning that the fruits of a growing economy were distributed evenly among its population. So what's happened in the last 25 years at least? Well, pretty much the opposite. So the economy is not growing enough, that's one point, but it's also more unequally distributed, the outcome or the results of that growth. So Cuba has become a more unequal society compared to what we were in '89. So it means that it is possible, perfectly possible, that even though the economy grows, some families find themselves remaining the same or even getting worse in terms of income and their ability to meet their basic needs.
Life quality in general.
Yeah, and the other explanation is related to the structure of the Cuban economy. So for instance, the high growth rates we had in the 2000s basically linked to our relations with Venezuela. Cuba started selling lots of professional services to that country. We reached during 3 years almost Chinese-style growth rates, like close to 10% a year. Yeah, but what was growing, or what was the source of that growth, were health services, basically, that were exported to Venezuela. Transportation was on decline, or housing was not getting enough money to build new apartments and all that. So the economy might be growing, but if it is growing in sectors that are not directly connected to families' welfare, they won't see the benefit of that growth. So in terms of the guidelines, that's a tricky equation, because it means that politically speaking, it's difficult to sell a package that has potential negative effects on some families when at a moment in which when you are not seeing the benefits or the results of that package. So over time, you might have a situation in which some families are demanding more results, but you know that you need some more time before those measures mature.
It's
So yeah,
complicated.
it's a contradiction. It's definitely a
It's
contradiction.
complicated. There's also an idea, Professor, that's I believe it's very complicated too. That has to do with the fact that we've seen the main changes after the guidelines are the increasing private businesses that we've been seeing, restaurants, beauty parlors, but a lot of people think, and analysts as well says that it's not enough because these growing or these flexibilities in the economy are not directed to essential sectors of the economy that could mean real growth for the economy. What obstacles do you think remain in our model, in the strategy that we may see right now through what the government is saying? What are the main obstacles that remain to see this productivity go up?
One thing that comes to my mind when I think about this growing number of so-called cuentapropistas or self-employed in Cuba is that
private workers. That's like
private workers. Yeah, that's right. So that's probably one of Cuba's euphemisms to refer to that. It's the private sector, basically, small, medium enterprises growing and emerging. So there you can see a clear example of a poor job at mobilizing our talent. So if you're saying that you have a fairly talented labor force by a developing country, why don't you use that talent, mobilize that talent? I mean, even if it is within the private sector, to make the economy grow faster. So we've created, I would say, too many restrictions for people to use that talent, and that's an example. So those activities are mainly low value added, very basic activities, manualities, that I would say make a poor use of the stock of knowledge, talent, and energy of Cuba's labor force. Again, if we don't succeed at mobilizing that for Cuba's development, there are few chances that we succeed in that task. And also taking into account Cuba's starting point. I mean, I talked about an stagnating economy for over 30 years. You need a lot of traction to change that situation. So the private sector, I mean, that private sector that we have in Cuba right now, it's a welcome development, I would say. Should be encouraged. I think we have to lift restrictions, but that by itself won't be enough to pull the economy. So we'll need, again, new rules, new institutions, and strategy, and we'll need to put also a lot of, emphasis on more established sectors. So, for instance, the ones in which certain firms operate today.
Do you think there's a strategy?
I don't think so. Frankly speaking, I don't see a strategy. I see more like accumulation of steps with more or less clear goals, but I don't see a strategy, properly speaking. I think we are more creating the conditions to adopt a strategy over the next few years.
Like knowing the conditions in which we are?
Well, we are experimenting a lot, I would say right now. So, look at what is going on with cooperatives, for instance. So the government has said very clearly that's an experiment. So we don't have a cooperative law in Cuba. So they are experimenting with that new form of ownership. Well, it was not new for the Cuban economy, but it is new outside agriculture in the Cuban context. The same can be said for all the things that we are doing. So again, we'll need like a lot of traction. So we'll need more changes to many other areas of the Cuban economy. And again, a large part of it has to do with Cuba's reintegrating itself into the world economy. There is no future for a small developing country without, having deep links with international economy.
There's an opening of the Cuban economy to this international foreign investment. At least the new law says that. Do you think, in which way do you think this foreign investment could help to the Cuban economy, and in which field sectors they would be more interested, or Cuba would be more interested to the international investment?
The brand new foreign investment law is part of a broader strategy, in my opinion, and in any case should be part of a broader strategy. One of the main constraints that we are facing today is that we are not investing enough in our economy. And if you don't invest enough, you don't have the means to propel the economy forward. The key is not the law itself, it's how we implement the law. We had a fairly good law before the one we adopted this year. The problem was the implementation phase of that law. So it is good if you say that you can start again, you want to, have a different approach to foreign investment in the Cuban economy, but the critical point is implementation.
So do you
that
think
calls for political courage in many
changes,
cases.
political changes also?
Also, that calls for changes in government officials' attitude toward foreign investors. We cannot see them as enemies. We know that they are coming to Cuba to
Take
generate
advantage
profits, to make money. But that's what they do in all countries, and we cannot change that. So we'd better understand that and try to use them for our purposes. And of course, you also need some kind of experience. And in that case, we have very little, I would say. So there will be a necessary learning process in the implementation phase. At the very beginning, probably it will be fairly bureaucratic, I would say. But if you have the political will to move forward, and you force one way or another, government officials to learn fast, to understand how business world works, people learn, so will Cubans, so eventually will succeed. For Cuba, it's of course problematic when it comes to foreign investment because of U.S. sanctions. So the U.S. market is, 230 times bigger than Cuba's. So if they have to decide, any foreign investor has to decide between Cuba and the United States, the answer is obvious, right? But, and that's a big problem for Cuba, I must say. But if we improve the way we deal with foreign investors, we'll attract a lot more than we've done in the last 25 years. And it's going to be critical, again, for Cuba's strategy.
Are you optimistic about the Cuban economy?
I am. I think there is a huge potential in Cuba.
You've described a very complex conditions and circumstances.
Yes,
why are you optimistic?
That's true. An optimistic is a person that tries usually to look beyond the current context. So, and as a professional, as an economist, if I look at today's Cuba, of course there are many challenges out there, but definitely there is a huge potential in Cuba. Do we have some very valuable natural resources, from mining to land to grow crops. We have a good geographical location, even though right now we cannot profit from it because of the US sanctions, but it will change in the future, no doubt about it. And on top of that, we have people that have the basics to move forward. They have talent, skills, knowledge, they have energy, and the willingness to succeed. So I don't have a doubt that if we are able to build a framework in which that energy that is somehow sleeping in every Cuban is unlocked, will be one of the most successful countries in the world, for sure.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Pleasure.
It's
Anytime.
my pleasure. Thank you.